Coming up on Arirang News. South Korea, the US, and Japan carry out their trilateral missile defense exercise in the East Sea. This in counter to escalating North Korean nuclear and missile threats. The number of new babies born in South Korea sinks to a fresh low, breaking the country's own record for the world's lowest fertility rate. New marriages are also at a record low, while more deaths are leading to greater natural decreases in the population. With South Korea's record low birth rate, the number of pediatricians in the country is declining. President Yoon vows to give as much as support possible to fill in the gaps in the country's pediatric medical system. Good evening. It's 9 p.m. here in South Korea. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. Security is where we begin tonight. South Korea, the United States, and Japan have conducted a combined maritime drill that practiced taking down incoming missiles from North Korea. Our defense correspondent Oh Soo-young has our top story.
South Korea, the United States, and Japan staged a combined missile defense drill Wednesday, enhancing their joint response to deterring North Korea's growing nuclear and missile threats. The drill took place in the East Sea and involved the three countries' Aegis-equipped guided missile warships, South Korea's largest destroyers Haejong the Great, the USS Barry, and Japan's Atago destroyer. Based on a computer simulation, the Allies practiced information sharing to increase their ability to detect, track, and intercept incoming ballistic missiles. A joint chief of staff official said South Korea and Japanese forces practiced missile detection and information sharing, while the US warship intercepted the projectile.
South Korea, the US, and Japan have strengthened our security cooperation and response system through this maritime missile defense training.
The exercise seems to have been organized in response to North Korea's intercontinental ballistic missile launch on Saturday, which was followed by 2 short-range ballistic missiles on Monday morning. It's the second such drill that the three countries have held since last October. Seoul's defense ministry says the trilateral maritime defense drill will continue to be held as part of joint efforts on deterring Pyongyang's growing threat to regional security. Meanwhile, the naval commanders of the three nations met in Yokosuka, Japan, at the US 7th Fleet Command and discussed ways to strengthen information sharing and further coordinate joint exercises. They strongly condemned North Korea's recent missile launches as a serious provocation that harms the peace and stability of the international community, as well as the Korean peninsula. Later on Wednesday in Washington, D.C., Seoul and Washington are scheduled to hold discussion-based tabletop exercises, which will focus on contingency planning and procedures upon a nuclear attack by North Korea. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
South Korea's military thinks that North Korea now has full launch capabilities for intercontinental ballistic missiles, and that there's also a high possibility the regime will launch reconnaissance satellites. That's according to the member of the National Assembly's Intelligence Committee, lawmaker Yoo Sang-bum, speaking to reporters. In a briefing on Wednesday, the committee received intelligence reports from the nation's Defense Intelligence Agency and others. Yoo shared that although Pyongyang has yet to launch its ICBMs at standard angles, it is equipped with full capabilities for regular launch. It's just that the regime is preparing a timeline, he said, to put pressure on the U.S. Last Saturday, North Korea launched an ICBM toward DEC. The South Korean government has strongly criticized Japan's so-called annual Takeshima Day celebrations that were held on Wednesday in Shimane Prefecture and has called on the country to abolish that event immediately. Takeshima is what Japan calls South Korea's easternmost islets of Dokdo. In a statement, Seoul's foreign ministry denounced what it called Japan's unfair repeated territorial claims with regard to Dokdo. It stressed that Dokdo is clearly Korean territory, historically, geographically, and according to international law. The Foreign Ministry also summoned the Deputy Chief of Mission at the Japanese Embassy in Seoul, Naoki Kumagai, to file a protest. As the war in Ukraine nears 1 year, U.S. President Joe Biden has noted in his speech that Russia will never be allowed to win. Just hours before that, Russian President Vladimir Putin announced a suspension of Russia's participation in an arms control treaty. Our foreign affairs correspondent, Bae Eun-ji, has more.
U.S. President Joe Biden delivered a speech in Poland a day after a secret visit to Kyiv, promising that Russia will never win over Ukraine. While marking 1 year since the start of the war, he also reaffirmed his unwavering support for Ukraine.
Brutality will never grind down the will of the free, and Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia. Never.
U.S. also plans to impose new sanctions on some 200 Russian individuals and entities this week. The Wall Street Journal reported that this is part of Washington and its allies' efforts to further isolate the Russian economy and cut off Moscow from access to critical materials that could bolster its military and technology sectors. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin declared during a State of the Nation address on Tuesday that Moscow is suspending its participation in the New START nuclear reduction treaty with Washington, the only remaining agreement that regulates the world's two largest nuclear arsenals. The pact, signed in 2010, limits the number of atomic warheads the two countries can deploy and is due to expire in 2026.
They want to deliver us a strategic defeat and claim our nuclear facilities. Regarding this, I have to say that Russia suspends its participation in the New START treaty.
Meanwhile, on Tuesday, Russian shelling continued in Ukraine, leaving 6 people killed and 12 others wounded in Kherson. The Ukrainian Southern Command said the shellings occurred while President Putin was giving a State of the Nation address. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called the latest attack a ruthless killing of civilians, adding that Russia targeted residential areas, high-rise buildings, public transport stops, and parking lots. Later this week, the UN General Assembly will vote on a draft resolution to find a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in Ukraine. It will be put to a vote during the special emergency session that will run from Wednesday to Thursday. Bae Eun-ji, Arirang News.
On the pandemic front, Korean health authorities have decided to lift their PCR testing requirement on arrivals from neighboring China starting next Wednesday. Song Yoo-jin has more.
South Korea is further easing travel rules for travelers from China. The Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasures Headquarters announced on Wednesday that from March 1st, travelers from mainland China will no longer have to get PCR tests upon arrival. They've been required to get tested within a day of entering the country since January 2nd after Beijing's decision to end zero COVID policies and an uptick in infections in China. Also from next month, flights departing from China heading to South Korea will be allowed to land at other airports. Flights from China will continue to arrive at Incheon International Airport only until the end of February. The decision was made on the back of the improved virus situation both at home and abroad.
South Korea's daily COVID-19 tally last week averaged around 11,599, down 14.4% from the week before. The number of critically ill patients has dropped to around 100 for the first time in 7 months. The percentage of travellers from China who've tested positive declined to 0.6% last week from 18.4% in the first week of January.
The latest new changes mean there will be only 2 remaining measures for visitors coming from China: proof of a negative COVID-19 test taken before departure, and travelers must provide their contact information to the Quarantine Information Pre-Entry System through the Q-Code app for effective tracking and tracing. These restrictions were also set to expire on February 28th, but health authorities pushed back the date to March 10th. Whether or not these rules are scrapped will depend on the virus situation then. Seoul has been lifting its virus protocols on Beijing one by one. On February 11th, the government decided to resume the issuance of short-term visas for Chinese nationals. Last Friday, it announced that the number of inbound flights from China would increase from the current 62 per week to 80 by the end of this month, rising to 100 per week from March. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, Beijing is considering a similar measure for travelers coming in from South Korea in response. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin said Wednesday that Beijing will consider taking a corresponding move at an adequate time. Adding that China is aware of South Korea's move, he says discriminatory restrictions should be removed as early as possible and conditions should be made that allow travel between the two countries to be more convenient. Now, moving on to the alarming rate of population decrease in South Korea. Data show last year the number of births in the country hit an all-time low, breaking its own record for the world's lowest fertility rate. South Korea again last year saw the number of babies born fall to an all-time low. That's according to the report released on Wednesday by Statistics Korea, saying there were around 249,000 births last year. It's a decline of around 11,000 or more than 4% from a year earlier. The number of births in the country has been dropping on year for 7th consecutive years, falling below the 400,000 mark in 2017, then 300,000 3 years later. Then last year, it plunged below 250,000. Also, the fertility rate, which is the average number of babies a woman is expected to have in her lifetime, fell last year to 0.78. This is the first time it's fallen below 0.8 and is the lowest figure since data was first compiled in 1970. Statistics Korea says the main driver was the drop in new marriages.
The number of new marriages last year also fell to the lowest since 1970 and is also one of the reasons for the low birth rate. The number of births is expected to keep falling in the future due to the continued decline in new marriages.
South Korea also had the lowest fertility rate among 38 OECD countries in 2020 with a figure of 0.84. This is less than half the OECD average of 1.59. Meanwhile, the number of deaths last year rose to 372,000, up 17% from a year earlier. This resulted in the natural decrease in the population of 123,000 last year, more than double the number the year before. Amid the country's record low birth rate, South Korea is seeing fewer and fewer pediatricians. This is leading to a lack of accessibility for sick children in certain areas of the country, making parents feel helpless. The health industry today put forth some measures to tackle this, followed by an order by President Yoon. Our Kim Do-yeon with this report.
South Korea is looking to improve its healthcare system for young children. Currently, according to the health ministry, the country is seeing a shortage of pediatricians, while some medical facilities specifically for children are having to be shut down. This leaves some parents helpless during dire situations, especially outside the capital region. And so on Wednesday, 3 major goals were announced. 1. Quickly expand medical infrastructure for severe pediatric cases. 2. Overcome blind spots in children's medical care. And 3. Expand manpower through fairer compensation. Specific plans included creating 4 more public children's hospitals to add to the current 10 and expanding support for the existing ones, creating a 24-hour hotline and video call system with pediatric professionals, and the test running of a compensation system for business losses incurred by children's hospitals. In addition, the ministry will lay out the requirements for the 45 top recognized medical centers, which include having a pediatric center and 24-hour emergency care for children. This comes as President Yoon Suk-yeol had already called for such policies to be implemented and on Wednesday went to visit Seoul National University's Children's Hospital to see the current situation, saying that protecting children's health is a country's first and foremost responsibility. He acknowledged the dire situation himself.
우리 사회가 많은 부분들이 발전했는데도 불구하고 아마 출생률이 자꾸 떨어져서 그렇지 오히려 과거 저희들이 잘할 때보다도 지금 이런 소아과 병원이 많이 부족하다고 하는 얘기들이 많습니다.
In a briefing after the event, the presidential spokesperson said Yoon has called for immediate changes.
The president said doctors avoiding becoming pediatricians is not their fault, it's the government's fault, adding that he said what was discussed on Wednesday has to be implemented well, and there's nothing more urgent. So if the national insurance isn't enough, the government should put in some of its budget for these changes.
During his visit, President Yoon also met with some young patients fighting severe diseases. This included a cancer patient of 19 months. Yoon showed his support for the parents and medical staff fighting with them. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Urban air mobility, or UAM, seems to have a very realistic chance of being a key method of transport. South Korea has also taken a step closer to achieving its goal of commercializing UAM through the so-called K-UAM Grand Challenge, a project that checks the safety and capability of urban air mobility. Shin Ha-young with the details.
Even though urban air mobility is yet to be commercialized around the world, its market outlook is bright. Morgan Stanley projects the global UAM market to rise to $1.5 trillion by 2040. South Korea aims to commercialize it in the year 2025. The government has come up with the Korean UAM demonstration project known as the K-UAM Grand Challenge, which tests UAM aircraft safety, traffic management capabilities, and vertiport construction for commercialization throughout 2 phases in rural and urban areas. The country is set to kick off the first phase of the project as, on Wednesday, the Transport Ministry announced the agreements it has in place with 46 companies.
The project has been recognized globally as the first in the world that incorporates commercial communication networks like 5G into UAM traffic management. We will conduct a demonstration in an urban area next year, which shows we're moving at a relatively faster pace compared to other countries.
The K-UAM Dream Team is one of the consortia led by SK Telecom and Hanwha Systems, along with one of the more prominent players in UAM market, Joby Aviation, a California-based electric aircraft maker.
We will demonstrate how we can utilize our existing telecommunication business to establish an air communication network for UAM. We expect that our data and AI-based technology can provide the best services to customers.
Meanwhile, the government has vowed to provide various support, including the enactment of the UAM Act that's based on both regulatory exemptions.
Our priority is to create an institutional framework for UAM, which is why we plan to establish related laws in the first half of this year. To fly UAM, there are different types of aviation regulations. We will work together as soon as possible to find ways to ease these regulations and establish safety standards.
Under the government's support, the groups will demonstrate their technologies in the first stage of the K-UAM Grand Challenge, which will take place in Goheung, Jeolnam Province from August until the end of 2024. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
On the foreign exchange front, the Korean won continues to lose ground against the US dollar amid concerns about the rate hikes by the US Federal Reserve. The $1 exchange rate closed at 1,304.91 per dollar on Wednesday. This is the first time in 2 months that it surpassed the 1,301 mark since December 19th. The country's benchmark KOSPI also shed almost 1.7%, and the secondary bourse KOSDAQ dropped by about 2%. Other Asian markets, including Japan's Nikkei 225 index and China's Shanghai Composite, also fell on Wednesday. HYBE, the K-pop company behind BTS, has purchased SM Entertainment founder Lee Soo-man's shares of that company to become its largest shareholder. HYBE says it is not pursuing a hostile merger and acquisition of SM, but the partial takeover plans have sparked controversy and legal battles. Jung Won-ju has the details.
HYBE, the K-pop company behind boy band BTS, has acquired a 14.8% stake in its industry rival SM Entertainment, becoming SM's largest shareholder. HYBE said Wednesday that it has completed the purchase 12 days earlier than scheduled. Originally, HYBE had agreed on February 10th to buy the shares from SM's founder and former chief producer Lee Soo-man for 422.8 billion won, or roughly $335.8 million, and said the deal would be sealed on March 6th. Lee had an 18.46% stake in SM at the time. His remaining 3.64% is also planned to go to HYBE within this year. Industry experts say that HYBE likely settled the deal early in order to complete the acquisition stably ahead of the SM shareholder meeting next month. HYBE said Tuesday the partial takeover is not part of any sort of hostile merger and acquisition strategy. But SM Entertainment has been strongly critical. HYBE CEO Park Ji-won said in a message to SM artists, their fans, employees, and shareholders on Wednesday that SM's legacy will be respected. The company also said it would support SM artists seeking opportunities overseas using the know-how and global network it has built up. But SM Entertainment CFO has expressed doubt over HYBE's promises. Meanwhile, a dispute over management control of SM began earlier this month with the announcement of SM 3.0, which focuses on Lee's resignation, and an emergency board meeting that decided to issue new shares and convertible bonds to Kakao through a third-party allocation method. If this goes through, Kakao would secure a 9.05% stake in SM and become the second largest shareholder, while Lee will lose his stake due to stock value dilution. In response, Lee filed a provisional disposition to stop the issuance. Lee's and SM's current management team have subsequently engaged in a court battle over the legality of SM's issuance of new shares and convertible bonds. HYBE is home to global K-pop acts such as BTS, 17, Tomorrow by Together, New Jeans, and LE SSERAFIM, while SM Entertainment is one of the country's top K-pop agencies and home to K-pop acts like EXO, Red Velvet, NCT, and aespa. 정은주, Arirang News.
Seoul Fashion Week is less than a month away. This season's event for fall and winter will take place at Dongdaemun Design Plaza from March 15th to the 19th. The South Korean girl group New Jeans was chosen as the event ambassador. Seoul Metropolitan Government announced on Wednesday that Fashion Week this time will take place entirely in person. Recent editions were held partially online because of the pandemic. This season, 30 designer brands plan to hold a fashion show, and buyers from 27 countries are expected to participate. A Seoul City official told Arirang News that due to the rise in popularity of K-content, there is also a growing demand for K-fashion. Anyone interested can watch the shows live on Seoul Fashion Week's official YouTube channel. Google has opened an online exhibition about the Korean demilitarized zone, featuring about 5,000 artworks, including historical pictures of the Korean War and 3D imagery and audio recordings of rare plants and animals in the isolated area. The company has partnered up with South Korea's Ministry of Patriots and Veteran Affairs in commemoration of the 70th anniversary of the armistice that halted the Korean War. Also known as the DMZ, the demilitarized zone is the heavily fortified land separating the two Koreas, created at the end of the Korean War. It's also a home to thousands of species of animals and is one of the most well-preserved areas in the world.
Frigid spells will finally ease off tomorrow and milder temperatures will make a return. But under warm spells, the nation will see finest concentrations soar as well. Western regions, including the Seoul metropolitan area, Chungcheongu and Jeollabuk-do provinces, will see air quality standing in the bad category. Eastern parts of the country will temporarily see high concentrations of fine dust for the evening hours. For Seoul and Gangwon-do province, dry conditions are persisting. Dry weather advisories have been issued for 3 consecutive days now. Fire danger remains high, so please be careful with fires. And for the south coast and Jeju Island, light rain of 5 millimeters are expected. For those in the area, make sure to have your umbrellas handy tomorrow. Seoul will be starting off at -2 degrees and Chuncheon at -5 degrees for the morning. Do expect wide temperature gaps with highs jumping significantly. Seoul will get up to 8 degrees. Gwangju 11, Gyeongjin, Busan will be topping out at 13 degrees. On Friday, the East Coast and Jeju Island will see a mix of rain or snowfall. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That brings us to the end of the newscast. Thank you for watching. We'll be back with the latest news tomorrow. Good night.